Ice Bucket Challenge was one of the most incredible things that we've seen in fundraising and philanthropy in years, and it's raised a huge amount of money, and I'm very excited to be joined by two friends and fellow thinkers in the nonprofit world. So we have with us Kivi Leroux Miller, who's the president of nonprofitmarketingguide.com, and also Joe Waters, who is a leading thinker and blogger on cause marketing at selfishgiving.com. So hello, Joe, and hello, Kivi.
Hi, Michael. Hey, Joe.
Michael. Hey, Kivi.
Great. Well, I want to start just by talking a little about this ice bucket thing. I mean, what do you make of it? It was a huge thing, and how do we put this into context? Is this something that's completely out of nowhere? Is this something that we see every year or two, that there's some giant breakthrough thing? And you know, what is this all about? What should we make of it? Kivi, why don't you get us started?
Well, you know, it was phenomenal, and I think earlier in the summer when it was just catching on, there were tons of naysayers saying how ridiculous it was, but you can't argue with the final tally. I'm not even sure how much it was, but I think it was over 120 million or something insane. So I don't think you can argue with that. I do think it's something that not everyone is going to be able to copy. There were really three things that I think made it successful. 2 out of the 3 I think others can learn from, and the third was really just the magic of that event this summer. So I think we'll talk about that in the next few minutes here.
Great, great. Well, Joe, what's your take on this thing?
Well, I really think it's a fabulous example of kind of a new fundraising that is kind of taking place, and you know, I've been seeing it since 2013, where we're really seeing this intersection of fundraising and cause and social media and mobile, kind of creating this incredible opportunity for individuals to take the stage in raising a lot of money for organizations. That's what I'm really excited about this, Mike.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I mean, for me, the biggest takeaway, you know, for organizations is the idea that donors also like something to do, like something meaningful to do, and mostly donors are treated as just an ATM, you know, and the only to do is to make a donation, but
right.
There was actually something, you know, that they were doing. So, do you, Joe, tell me a little more about how you see it in your world, you know, this idea of doing.
Yeah, no, I think the doing part is really important, and that has actually been around for a long time. I mean, whether you know you were doing bowl-a-thons in the 1980s or something like that, it's always been a part of doing for causes. What's different now is the digital aspect, and you know the ability that people have to share information, to share videos, to challenge people, to support good causes. And it's social media and mobile technology that's really making this possible.
Interesting. Kivi, do you think this could have gone as big as it was without Facebook?
I don't think there's any way. I mean, I think the most important things about this, and there are several, but was that you had to video yourself to do the challenge. Yeah. You couldn't just say, oh, yeah, I did it, and sort of get credit for it within your social network. You had to record it happening. And so, of course, that's very new in terms of everybody being able to do that on their phone and to share it. So, you know, I don't know that it had to be Facebook, but it had to be the whole idea of, you know, easy access to video that you could upload immediately and share it out to your network of friends.
Yeah,
So
it's interesting because, you know, in our world, we've run a lot of video contests, for example, and asking somebody to make a video has traditionally been a very high bar, where you see very low participation rates. But this was different. Why do you think that was? Do you think it's really just about phones, or is there something else there? Joe, what do you think?
Well, you know, I think video has become obviously much easier for people to do. And I think what it also fed into with the Ice Bucket Challenge is the idea of doing these short videos, these mini videos. I mean, so often when we think of video, we're thinking of something a little bit longer than a couple of minutes. But that is exactly what has happened with the Ice Bucket Challenge, is that people brought an Instagram and Vine mentality to video, and using that on Facebook so that it could be used in a short, condensed, unprofessional way and still have an impact.
Yeah, I think there was a certain tipping point of this where big names, people like Bill Gates and celebrities and others, felt like they had to do one, right? What was that? How do everybody dreams that their campaign gets to that moment where everybody feels like they have to do it?
Well, it's interesting too, and Kivi, I was wondering if you would agree with this. Is I think in so many ways, companies and nonprofits are followers now to do-gooders and fundraisers because of the capabilities they have, and that businesses and nonprofits need to be much more nimble about how they connect with people, how they follow people, how they follow along in trends, and capitalize on that, not only to do good, but to do good for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The ALS Association staff was certainly aware of this challenge and were supportive of it, but it's not something that was organization-driven at all.
Yeah.
So, at some level, they had to just step back and let it happen.
Yeah.
And I think lots of times nonprofits are afraid of that. They're just control freaks, or for whatever reason, just don't have a comfort level with people going off and doing that. The one thing that I think is so compelling about the videos, the technology and the ease of that aside, is the challenge itself with dumping ice on your head, I think was the brilliant magic in all of this. It's one of those things that is so simple and yet so brilliant. Because people are used to taking videos of their friends doing stupid things all the time. That's when you reach for your camera, right, is when somebody is doing something goofy. So here they're getting, they have to do the goofy thing in order to participate in the challenge. And I just thought it was brilliant because it was a bit of a sacrifice that you were asking people to do. Granted, it wasn't a great sacrifice, but I know when I was sitting there waiting for my daughters to dump the bucket on my head, my heart was racing, and I had that anxiety waiting for the ice bucket to hit. So it was an emotional, engaging way for people to participate, and yet in a way that was still very fun, very silly, not super deep and intense and dark and dreary like a lot of nonprofit things would be, and like you might frankly expect something for a disease as terrible as ALS to be. So I think the ice bucket challenge itself was really the brilliant magic in all of this.
Yeah, and, it's such a good point too, because I think if this had happened for, say, cancer, people would be and look at it and say, oh well, of course it happened. It's for cancer. Such a big group of demographic, strong brands and stuff like that. But then you think if this is happening for ALS, a disease, unfortunately, that doesn't get a ton of recognition and is a niche within the muscular dystrophy family. So it really does speak, Kivi, to just how important the challenge was to the success of the program.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a sense among us fundraisers, that and philanthropy and nonprofit people, that it was really a perfect storm of things that came together to make this so big. That there was a lot of bad news in the world, and this was something fun. That it happened in the summer, and it took off in the summer. You imagine if the seed was sort of at the wrong time of year, it just wouldn't have.
Absolutely. The fact, Mike and Kivi, that it originated here in the Northeast in Boston. In many instances, it really took hold, as all good things do, as you know. The fact that we had such a hot and a dry summer here in Boston really fed that and got people to do it. Whereas if it had been cool and wet, I think it would have been a different story.
Yeah, I think the other thing that, Kivi, that you said about the idea that it really didn't start inside the organization. I think this is a real challenge for organizations, and this brings up what Beth Cantor's been writing about and Allison Fine with the Network Nonprofit, and the idea of allowing for the best ideas to come in and embracing those and empowering people. Do you think we've turned the corner on that a bit, or do you think we're still in the kind of fortress organization world that we've been in, until recently?
I think we have a long way to go. I mean, I talk to communications directors all day, every day, and there is still a lot of fear about what they themselves do, and I'm constantly trying to encourage people to experiment more and try new things and be okay with failure. And so, if they're not even okay internally, I think that's really hard to let those free agents roam, like Allison and Beth talk about. On the other hand, it may actually give them more freedom because they don't have any control. And so maybe they can say, well, I have no control over this, and sort of on the side be encouraging it. So maybe it will work from that perspective.
Yeah.
Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge for nonprofits to think this way. And what I really have been encouraging my nonprofit clients to do is to really encourage the fundraisers that their supporters want to do, to tap into their passions and their interests. I mean, in 2013, after the Boston Marathon bombing, we saw people come out of the woodwork to raise over, $75 million for the victims, and it included 3 Emerson College students who on their own connected with a t-shirt company out in the Midwest and raised $1 million by selling 70,000 t-shirts. So, I mean, that's something that's done independently. So what I think every nonprofit really needs to do now is they really need to look at their supporters and see how they can foster that interest and grow that support. Now, what's interesting, though, Mike and Kivi, for businesses, what I tell them from a cost marketing perspective now is look more to individuals for opportunities and less to nonprofits, because individuals are more dynamic, they have the resources, they have the ability, they have the technology, whereas nonprofits are constrained in many ways from making these types of programs happen.
Yeah, Joe, I think that's really, you've hit on a huge challenge. There is that an organization is not the same thing as a cause.
Right.
We've seen that individuals can today organize and make things happen in the world without that central organizational.
That's right.
In the middle, and that's a threat in a sense to. It's an opportunity to really make a difference in the world, but it's also a threat to the organism of an organization.
Yep.
And they're going to have to figure out how to open up, how to be more networked, how to encourage their supporters to do things. And again, I go back to that idea of doing. How do you give people meaningful actions to do that feel like they matter, that feel like they're involved, that isn't the lowest bar, that isn't just about money all the time. And for me, that's connected to this idea of everyday heroes.
Yeah.
That the donors are heroes. They're doing something and they need it for themselves. And the good fundraisers know that, right? The good fundraisers aren't begging for money; they're giving opportunities to people to make a difference in the world. And those heroes need actions to do. And if pouring a bucket of ice water over your head makes you feel like you're active and doing something, and you're part of this wave, more power to it. Even though if you start to think, a lot of people were saying, what does this have to do with the disease? But we also know it raised incredible awareness. I mean, more people know about ALS today. I mean, it's orders of magnitude, and I think that will pay off, for the organization in the long term. Actually, which brings up a question that I have for you is somebody asked me something I hadn't really thought about, which is, do you think the ALS Association is going to try to do this as an annual thing, or you think this was a thing that's done? And if so, how are people going to respond to this next year? Kivi, what do you think?
I don't know. I think it's a good question. It may have tapped itself out this year, but we also have such a short, memory for these sorts of things that, maybe it could work next year, especially if they get, if they really think about how they're going to kick it off and get some really interesting kickoffs, some really interesting high-profile people to do it again, maybe do it with a twist. I mean, they had superstars in every conceivable field participate in this thing. And so I think if they're thoughtful about it and they really get some of that energy and maybe add a couple little twists to it, I don't think they're ever going to replicate these numbers. But, hey, if they can raise 10 or 20 million, why not?
Right. Joe, what do you think?
I think people loved the Ice Bucket Challenge. I think about now people are kind of sick of the Ice Bucket Challenge, and the ALS Association is going to make sure that we hate the Ice Bucket Challenge, because they are going to hop on this for the next decade. And they'll have people out there that don't want to do it, just like their walks, just like their runs. And I'm not just picking on the ALS Association. I'm picking on nonprofits in general. They will beat this to death. Okay, and even their efforts too to trademark the Ice Bucket Challenge, just they do not understand the power and the opportunity there. That it's kind of like they were trying to bottle Boston Strong, which of course no one could do, and it's like wanting to bottle like a Macy's promotion over Christmas, but the problem is now it's January. Okay, it's really not worth anything.
Right.
And I think that's the challenge with with nonprofits is I have no doubt that they will beat this to death, and people will be really unhappy with it. And I do agree with Kivi is that if you can do this, I guess the next couple of years and raise perhaps millions from it, maybe that's in the best interest of the organization. But if that takes you away from focusing on what you learn from the Ice Bucket Challenge and what the important takeaways of it, well, shame on you.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's, in a way, the lesson from this isn't about let's carry this Ice Bucket Challenge thing, but the lesson is to know which bandwagon to hop on, to know how to follow your supporters, to maybe even try to seed the opportunities from supporters to find interesting things to do that you can then share with others and create some momentum around. But that's probably not going to be the takeaway, right?
No, that will be, they'll try to institutionalize it. And I hope they don't, because I think they would be smarter. But there's also, I'm sure, a lot of pressure on them to do just that. Right.
So I want to just turn now, for the time we have left, really, to just talk about putting on your consultant's hat and saying, you're called into a senior leaders meeting of an organization, and they say, wow, this Ice Bucket Challenge thing was awesome. What's our Ice Bucket Challenge, right? They're not an organization that's so unsophisticated to think that they can actually do the Ice Bucket Challenge with them as the beneficiary. But they're saying, what's the equivalent for us? How do we seed the magic? How do we create something that can take off on its own, that can empower supporters, that can be fun? So, Kivi, how would you direct that conversation inside an organization?
Well, I think the video was really important, like we've already talked about. So, what could you do that is visual in nature if you really are trying to take what you can from this as a model? The other thing that we haven't really talked about directly is that you challenged other specific human beings by name, usually on the video, if not just in the post, and really called out your friends. And, that was a huge part of this going viral. It wasn't just, oh, I've done the bucket challenge, yay, are you going to do it too? I called out a relative, each of my daughters called out their best friends by name, and that's really how the thing spread. So again, I think you have to figure out a challenge that people are willing to challenge individuals on, that they're willing to be videotaped doing, and that's not easy, I don't think, to come up with that. But I do think we can learn from those lessons broadly that the visual is very important in transmitting it through the networks and coming up with ways that allow people to really pass it on from one human being to another very specifically.
Yeah, that's all great points. I mean, I think one of the things we also have to say is that there's a very small group of people who have ALS or are touched by ALS directly compared to other things. And that certainly wasn't a prerequisite to being involved in this, right? This is something that a very broad base of people got involved in, even without that personal connection, which is interesting.
Right, and because the challenge is so fun. You wanted to see your friends and family get the bucket of ice dropped on them. It's that tiny bit of, just seeing people uncomfortable that people relish, and you get sick pleasure out of that.
Yeah.
It's part of human nature. And so again, I think that's part of why this particular thing worked, but I think that's really hard to replicate.
But I also, just to echo what you just said, though, I think these are serious issues. It's a terrible disease. It's awful. If you're around it, it can be depressing. But what happened here wasn't depressing at all. It was fun. No. It was about community. And I think I think every organization, regardless of how difficult you think your issue are, you don't have to you can create community around that issue that is fun, that's engaging, even if the issue is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, what would you say to the organization that wants some help?
Well, I think the important thing, and it's something that we've touched on already, is about the importance of empowering supporters. And people need to think more strategically that way. Both businesses that want to help causes and nonprofits, is they need to put the emphasis more on the supporters and what they're doing, what their interests are. And you know what? This requires that we really know the people that we're working with and that are supporting our organization, which nonprofits and even some businesses don't do as well as they should. The second thing is, I think, is the social media component. Is, I still have people coming up to me saying, should I be on Facebook? And, these types of questions. And what they don't understand is that we're all in the publishing business now. And what I tell all those people is the first thing you should do today is go buy Content Marketing for Nonprofits by Miss Kivi.
Thank you.
Which is an excellent book and an excellent introduction for nonprofits on how to do social media, because that was a big key here. And then the third thing, Mike, that I think I would emphasize is the importance and emphasis on mobile and how this was happening through the mobile screen. And what's happening with many businesses and nonprofits is we're still not seeing the dominance of the third screen, and as some people call it. And we really have to give that consideration and do everything in our organizations, all our communications, all our events, through the lens of mobile, which is really important. So I would tell those people those three things in particular.
That's terrific. We're seeing with our clients that we're doing web development work for, video work for, seeing really large percentages of mobile adoption happening at a kind of exponential pace. So it might be that 50 or 60% of your emails are being opened on mobile first.
Yeah. And think about that too. When you're sending an email that is being opened on a mobile device as opposed to a laptop or desktop, it should be different. There are different ways of including information there that will make it more effective, and that goes with your videos, it goes with your email newsletters, or anything else that you're communicating. And it's different for Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
And it's interesting is how many environments inside organizations are looking at things through that lens. Like how many meetings about the email is everybody looking at the email on their phone versus looking at it on some really big screen to talk. I think even just those small changes of saying, what view do we have of this, could change how people start to create things.
Yeah, I agree. As my brother tells his students, you have a wonderful future ahead of you. I suggest you get going.
Okay, Kivi or Joe, are there other things that you would want to tell organizations about related to the challenge?
Joe, go ahead.
I think with the challenge too, I think that what I would really emphasize too is that the challenge, like Boston Strong when it happened here in Boston, is a phenomenon. And you always can't tap into the energy of that phenomenon as it happened and why it unfolded and why it was successful. But there are a lot of takeaways from that. And that's the thing too, is we keep on seeing proof being put out there to both businesses and nonprofits about how things are changing and how they need to adjust. This is actually just a big piece of proof, a big rock that has fallen in the laps of nonprofits in businesses and really made itself known. So I'm looking forward to a lot of different and exciting and successful efforts that come because of this campaign.
That's great. Kivi, do you have other things?
Yeah, I would just add that I don't think you're going to ever replicate this thing. I think we're pretty clear about that. So when you're invited to the meeting about how you're going to come up with your own ice bucket challenge, I would encourage you to refocus that meeting onto some of the things we've talked about today, really knowing who's excited about your cause and understanding who those people are and why they're fired up about it and what ideas they have about getting other people fired up about it. Really listening, which, as professional marketers we know is a really important part of marketing that's often left to the side. So, go out there and really listen to people about what gets them fired up and work from that place instead of trying to copy somebody else's thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I just want to end with one thing. Joe, in the blog post that you wrote about this, you talked about that we owe a debt of gratitude in this kind of thing to some folks from the past. So will you just say a little bit about that?
Well, I think what I was trying to get at, as someone who started their career 20 years ago with the Muscular Dystrophy Association and worked many Jerry Lewis telethons throughout the weekend, one of the things you have to realize is there are a lot of things that contributed to the success here. And Jerry Lewis and the telethon was a big part of that, because Jerry Lewis is the first one to actually really take things viral on television at the time in terms of promoting muscular dystrophy, which was basically an unknown disease in this country before that. And also the fact that he made it so relevant to people, or enough relevant, that this could be connected with the ALS Foundation, that we could have another organization that could raise money from this effort, is a big tip of the hat, I think, to him and what he did through the years. And that these things just don't happen by themselves. They happen because of a lot of other reasons, and one of those is Jerry Lewis.
Terrific. Well, thank you both for joining us. Joe Waters, who you can find out more about at selfishgiving.com, and Kivi Leroux Miller at Nonprofit Marketing Guide. Thank you both so much. This is Michael Hoffman at C3. So we're going to sign off now, and thank you for joining us with this Hangout, and I hope I have the opportunity to talk to both of you much more about all of the next things that are happening.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Michael. Bye-bye.